we go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
In the shadow's shroud he finds his domain, a vampire stalking, blood pumping through his veins. In a darkened alley where lamplight fails, his hunger grows as night's dark cloak prevails. Eyes like embered coals gleam with dark intent. He hungers for a taste, his dark thirst never spent. Silent as a wraith, he moves with ghostly grace, drawing nearer to his prey in that forsaken place. Moonlight offers glimpses, revealing pale white skin. As he closes in, the prey feels the dread within. Heartbeats quicken, fear casts its blinding spell. In the alley's depths, where terror starts to swell, with a predator's grace, he descends from the night, cloaked in dark allure, a sinister delight. Whispers of his breath, like chilling wind's caress, as he sinks his fangs the prey's final distress. In the alley's depths, a life's essence fades as the vampire feeds in dark, unholy shades. A tale of terror where evil takes its reign. In the shadow's shroud he leaves his haunting stain.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen. And on this episode of Planet 8, we're still in the spooky season. Halloween is right around the corner. That's right. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, and I highly recommend you do, you would have just saw Chief Engineer Bob's very chic, very cool trick-or-treat shirt, which falls into play because our Halloween season this year, we're going to continue with our vampires. Our prior episode was the birth of the vampire. We talked about Nosferatu, Dracula, and the Spanish version of Dracula. This go round, we're going to talk about some of our, well, if not favorite, what we thought were interesting vampire films.
And some may have a different opinion on what was interesting and what was not, but we'll get into that.
It's all in the eye of the beholder.
We'll get into our picks and why we picked them. And you know what? Let's just throw it up to the satellite. Walker, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Larry. Well, I'm going to start off with what I think is a surefire winner. I was going to say modern, but I realize this is like now, 50-year-old, 40-year-old. This is what I think of as modern. So this is actually what they considered to be a mini series. It was a 2-part movie, 1979. I am talking about the great Salem's Lot.
This is, if nothing else, it's a modern classic. How's that?
Yes, nice way to put it. Modern classic. I got to say that when I was a kid and this came on TV, this was like the big talk at school the next day. You'd watch it, and the next day at school, everybody's like, did you see the little kid at the window? And he's scratching at the window, and the other kid's got the cross, and everybody, it made a real impact. And it still has like really powerful imagery in it. It has a really great story. So it's based on a novel by Stephen King. It's just a great story that apparently came about because King was talking to his wife and saying, well, what would happen if, Dracula showed up today in our world? And his wife said, well, he'd probably take a boat to New York and step out on the street and get run over by a taxi. So then King was like, well, maybe what if he went to like a small town? And so with that as like the germ of the idea, he wrote this great story. Now the movie does kind of stray away from his story a bit, but still at the heart, it has a lot of elements that, if you read any other Stephen King books, you'll kind of see some similarities. King has a tendency to sort of integrate himself into the story. And so the main character, Ben Mears, is this writer. Not surprising, we see that in multiple Stephen King stories, who lived in this small town of Salem's Lot, which is in Maine, although they filmed it in California. They filmed it in Ferndale, California. Ferndale. And so he had this weird experience when he was a little boy, about 9 or 10 years old. There was a creepy house called the Marston House up on this hill in Salem's Lot. And he had gone inside and thought he saw a vision of this person hanging inside the house, and that the body opened its eyes and stared at him, and it totally freaked him out. And he just was always convinced that this house was like pure evil. And so he and his family had moved away from Salem's Lot when he was a little kid. And then as a writer, he felt this urge to come back and see the town and write about the house. And so he's one proxy for Stephen King. The other proxy is there's this young kid named Mark Petrie, who was played by, was it Lance Kerwin, I think, who people will remember as like, what was the name of the show? Something at 15. There was a show with this kid. Obviously, I don't have it in my notes. But anyway, and the younger kid is also sort of a proxy for Stephen King, because he's a really smart kid who is also a bit of a writer, but he's into things like magic and monsters, and he's like painting all these great Aurora models in his room and stuff. So we have these two disparate characters who will be brought together because of events occurring, because a stranger shows up in town, Mr. Straker. And he opens this antique store, and he said, oh, my partner, Mr. Barlow, is going to show up. And so anyway, if anybody's seen it before, you recognize that eventually all the different people in the show are kind of in the town are pulled together through the machinations of Mr. Straker, because Mr. Barlow is actually a vampire, and he is one of the coolest looking vampires. He's basically looks a lot like the vampire in Nosferatu, only, I don't know, like amped up 10 times. He's like really satanic looking, really demonic. And for me, I kind of feel like that's the way vampires should look. They should not be like these suave gentlemen who can, mix with society. They should look like hell beasts, So, and he makes quite an entrance in the movie. That was another thing all the kids were talking about. And did you see? And then the ball came through the window, and then the kid stood up. Everybody was freaking out over that too. So yeah, I don't want to like go plot detail by detail in the plot, but I do want to say that I think that vampire design was really impressive. I think it made an impact on a lot of other people further on in future movies. And yes, you could say it was derivative of Nosferatu, but they did a lot of other things with it. Another neat fact is that the actor who played Mr. Barlow was Reggie Nalder. Now, Reggie Nalder also was in Star Trek. and he played the Andorian ambassador in Journey to Babel. So
Shut your mouth.
yeah,
Are you serious?
I am.
I did not know that.
He's just a kind of a thin, creepy looking dude, or he was. So he was perfect for that kind of a role. So I think, it was a really well done film. I think it had all these great elements in it that some of them were very stereotypical, with like the spooky house and the stranger in town and the children disappearing, but it was all put together in a really impressive way. I know one of the things with the kid at the window scratching, they basically put a kid on the back of like a crane and blew smoke around him, and then they filmed it in reverse. So when he's swooping in, they had pulled him back, and the smoke had like been blown in, but it looks like it's sort of forming around him. So it gave it a really weird, otherworldly look for his movements. Toby Hooper, I listened to his commentary, have to say, not the most exciting commentary. So I wouldn't, the Blu-ray is a bare bones disc. So if you get the Blu-ray, you're not going to get a lot of special, basically you're not going to get anything special. Toby Hooper's commentary is on it. And he mentions how they did these effects, that he didn't want to do wires because wires are too obvious and everything. So they came up with this crane effect and doing it backwards and stuff. Very effective, really looks like creepy and otherworldly.
You got to give him credit, though, as practical effects on a TV budget.
Right. It was the most money he had to work with. I think they said $4 million, but still it was very limited. Most of the money's going to some of these big name actors.
Right.
They had James Mason as Mr. Straker, so he was a well-known film actor. They had David Soul.
At that fresh time, off of Starsky and Hutch.
Right. He was very well compensated at that time. So, they had to do it all practical, but I mean, it looked fantastic. And even watching it again, it's very effective because most of it is suspense. They managed to build things up a lot. So anyway, that's my first pick. I know we got to get through a few other things. I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts.
Well, I mean, yeah, I saw it when it came out on TV, and same
not
thing.
In a theater.
Not in a theater, on TV. Same thing though. You go to school and everybody's talking about. See, when it came out, 77, right?
79.
79. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was 19 at the time. Yes, I'm an old guy. And not quite too far removed from the years that I spent at friends' houses, sitting there making the Aurora monster models and collecting those. So seeing this and seeing the kid in his room painting the monster models, I'm like, yeah, that's me right there.
Mm-hmm.
Instant recognition. And I was instantly able to get into that part of it. But then to see the kid fly up to the window, yeah, I think that had the biggest impact in the whole series, the whole 2-night movie for me. Because yeah, it was two 2-hour time slots, back to back, 2 evenings. So you take out the commercials, and it's probably about an hour and 40 minutes per movie.
Like
so you're 3 hours and a chunk of change. So I didn't get to watch it for this episode because I didn't have 3 hours and a chunk of change, but I do remember it. I do have it on DVD. I did watch it not too long ago, but I was always a big fan of Starsky and Hutch, so I always liked David Soul. Although back in high school, a friend of mine, her best friend was David Soul's niece. And so there was that kind of connection there. Although she didn't have a lot of nice things to say about David Soul, but yeah.
Okay.
We'll save that for like Planet 8 gossip episode or something. But no, I enjoy, and spoiler alert, at the end, he and the kid go off like they're going to be vampire hunters. And I'm sure it was trying to set up maybe a follow-up series or a sequel film or something, but I don't think that ever really came to be.
Yeah, not with the cast. I think they did some sort of thing years later, but
I think they did like a remake or something, but
there was also a remake. Yeah.
that was an actual movie, right? It wasn't like a.
I think there was another TV movie
Oh, really? Okay.
that they did. Yeah. Maybe with Rob Lowe. What about you, Larry?
You know, I remember, so around that time we had, or before Salem's Lot, Kolchak, The Night Stalker, The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, Night Gallery. You know, there was some macabre and horror on TV, but yeah, this had an impact. It was, everyone was talking about it. Like you said, you know, next day you go to school. The I always say this is pre-CGI, so it was practical effects. You know, filming some of the scenes backwards, or, you know, having the actors move backwards and then replaying the film, and it gave it this otherworldly, odd kind of texture and feel. It was just so good. And even after all these years, I would say if you have not seen the original Salem's Lot, you really need to dedicate a bit of time. If it's on Freevee, or I'm not sure where it's at. We'll talk more in the censor sweep about Best Buy discontinuing physical media. But you know, if you have it on, you have the ability to get on DVD or, you know, whatever, I would, and enjoy it. It's a great moody film to watch around Halloween as well. So,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you hear anyone scratching at your window and it's a kid, don't open the.
Don't let that kid in.
That's right. Yeah, but very enjoyable.
Yeah.
You know, and it's funny because if you think about it, at the time, this was like a 2-night, you know, like CBS movie night or ABC at the movies. Who was doing, you know, something like that at the time?
Yeah.
Nobody.
And it's funny too, because even though like different people had gone after the rights, there were a lot of folks who said, you know, this may not be filmable. They weren't sure that they could take that book and actually turn it into, you know, at first they thought about a movie, and it was like, it's too long. So then it went to TV, and there was still some question about, can we really turn this into a TV, you know, a TV movie? And yeah, they wound up doing the 2-night thing. But it, you know, they did a great job.
Still holds up today.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's move the vampire train along. Let's kick it back to the chief. Bob, what do you got for us?
Well, being that I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and spent a lot of time in my youth, my summers out at the boardwalk in Santa Cruz, I had to choose The Lost Boys. And Lost Boys was written by Harvey Bernard and directed by everyone's favorite Joel Schumacher, who, as you may well know, did Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. But he also did a movie called 8mm, which I thought was really good, and I would recommend people watch 8mm. But it was also, like I say, written by Harvey Bernard, and he had written all the Omen movies, as well as the Goonies. So when you're watching The Lost Boys, it's almost like a compromise or a combination of the Omen and the Goonies in feel and texture. But basically, it was originally supposed to be directed by Richard Donner.
Oh.
And Richard Donner came in, and he had also directed the Goonies. So he wanted to make this like another Goonies. He wanted the cast, he wanted the Lost Boys to be like 12 or 13. And then the Frog Brothers, who are sort of the vampire hunters of the story, he wanted them to be like 8 years old. And they'd be running after vampires like, a la the Goonies. So he was into this for a little bit and then ended up going on to other projects. And that's when they brought Joel Schumacher in. And he decided to make it a little more adult, a little sexier, and make all the, like the Lost Boys themselves are probably late teens. The Frog Brothers are probably early teens. And I think it worked really well. And it's got a great cast. And again, it was shot in Santa Cruz. So a lot of the scenes were in Santa Cruz, but they also went to Palos Verdes Peninsula in LA, which is where the cave entrance was, where the Lost Boys had their little hideout. And then they also went to Santa Clarita up by Magic Mountain, which is where they filmed, if you remember the movie, is where they filmed the scene where they're all hanging off the bridge with the railroad, with the train going over it. And that was a great scene as well, because below the bridge, it wasn't just water. You don't see water, you just see fog. And you can't see what's down there. So as they let go and they fall into this mist, you have no idea where they're going. But I just thought The Lost Boys, it was really enjoyable. Of course, the Lost Boys themselves were named after the Lost Boys and Peter Pan. And the other Peter Pan connection was that basically when Schumacher came in, he was thinking about the connection, with Lost Boys and Peter Pan. And the whole idea was sort of, well, if Peter Pan comes out at night and he's eternally young and he can fly, well, what if Peter Pan was a vampire? So they just kind of took that and ran with it. But I thought it was really good. It's a lot of, a contrast between the Lost Boys, late teens, motorcycle group trying to recruit the one brother, and then the younger brother kind of taking up with the Frog Brothers, who were running it, basically working in a comic book shop. And they were basically vampire hunters. But it's funny because when I was watching the Frog Brothers, I told Debbie, I'm like, who do they remind you of? The way they act and the way they know everything about the vampires and that. And if you watch them and think to the X-Files, they're very much like the Lone Gunman. The Lone Gunman of Santa Clara, murder capital of the world. So I would recommend The Lost Boys if you haven't seen it. Very stylized and very cool.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it for a long time, and it to me has a Goonies feel to it. There's some frights, to be sure, but there's some good jokes, some good humor, especially with the Corey Feldman and I can't think of the other actor's name, but they pretend like they're these badass vampire killers, and then when the dude who hits the wall, they're like, what?
Well, that's the thing, when they first finally come face to face with vampires, they're not in their coffins. They're all hanging upside down from the top of this cave. And they go up there, it's like, well, they're asleep, we can stake them. And then of course one wakes up and they're like, oh my God, there you go. Had to run out of the cave and get chased out.
What's cool too in watching these vampire films with Jasmine, she doesn't watch half the crap that I watch, all the horror and sci-fi, and so she started asking, well, why aren't they in coffins? Because up to that point, all the vampires had some form of coffin. Some of the coffins had native soil. And I'm like, well, these are different kinds of vampires. And as we go through the films tonight, there's different rules depending on the kind of vampire that they're portraying in the movie. And she was like, oh, she says like Twilight. I'm like, those weren't real vampires, but yeah, like Twilight. Um,
I can guarantee you none of us picked a Twilight film.
Yeah, that's
um,
not going to make a list.
but it was cool, you know. They invited, spoiler alert, they invited the head vampire because he's dating their mom to dinner, and so when they fed him raw garlic, it didn't hurt him. And his reasoning, or you know, the rule was that, well, you invited me into the home, so you have no power over me. So the crucifix, the garlic, all that stuff didn't work.
Hmm.
It did later on when he wasn't invited. But you know, they all have their own logic. So, but a fun movie.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
80s soundtrack. So, you
I
know,
was going to
Very
say,
much an 80s soundtrack.
yeah, this is very much an 80s film for me. I remember seeing it when it came out, and a lot of the musical choices were interesting. I remember Echo and the Bunnymen doing the Doors song, "The People Are Strange."
Yeah.
And that was when there was sort of a resurgence of interest in the Doors. I remember Rolling Stone had done that big cover with Jim Morrison saying that, well, something like he's the sexiest man, dead man, or something like that. And I felt like Jason Patrick, they sort of, with his hair and everything, like they were kind of going for that Jim Morrison look.
And yeah, and Sutherland is the head vampire. And well, aside from Dad, but yeah, I thought he did a great job. Yeah.
You know who was I forgot, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and I can't think of his name. Played one of the vampires, a very
Oh,
badass vampire. What's that?
yeah, you're right. It's
Yeah, I can't
Bill.
think of it. There you go. Yeah.
It's what is his name? Gosh, let's see. Can I find it quickly? No, I can't find it quickly. But
Planet
Yeah, I
Ape
mean, all the
Comics.
vampires are, handpicked by Joel
Mm.
Schumacher, and he did a great job of casting. And some of it was like when he first saw the actor, it's like, I don't know if they're really what I'm looking for. But then after an audition, he zero in, okay, this person's definitely this character. But
Alex Winter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's a very stylized film. I think my second pick is also a very stylized film. So, sometimes with vampires, I think there is that element of you want a certain look and you want a certain, feel, and Lost Boys definitely has that in spades. So,
Yeah. And you know, again with Jasmine, it was interesting because Kiefer didn't bite anyone. He just gave him a jug of his blood and he drank it like wine, and then the process began from there. So it's interesting, as we, like I said, as we go through the films, there's going to be different ways of becoming a vampire. And it's a fun little adventure to take on. Okay, so Lost Boys, check it out if you haven't. My pick, what I tried to do is I tried to go with other than American vampire stories. And one of my favorite TV shows stems from a movie, a mockumentary. That's right, What We Do in the Shadows. And this is a movie from 2014. I'm going to butcher some of the names. That's what happens when you pick international films. Jermaine Clement and one of Bob's favorite directors, Taika Waititi. And they consider this movie the first installment of the franchise. I think it became more popular on TV, and so then it gets the franchise. But basically, the film's plot concerns several vampires who live together in a flat in Wellington. And if you've watched any of the MTV, I don't know what you call them, like Jersey Shore or and they just have a film crew following people around eating, pooping, and going to work. That's kind of what they did here. And so the documentary crew follows 4 vampire housemates, which is interesting because when they transitioned to the TV show, they recast the actors and added some and subtracted some. But in the movie, it's Viago, Vladislav, Deacon, and Peter. And they all possess, vampire powers. They can levitate, they can transform into animals, they can hypnotize, and they have a familiar. The familiar helps them, find victims, cleans up afterwards, does the shopping, I guess, would pay the bills and whatnot. But it's a fun movie. It's definitely humor. There's even the gore. I know Walker is kind of aversive to a lot of like blood splattering. We did the Evil Dead, and she was like, "Oh, that was just too much."
That was tough. Yeah.
Yeah. This has some blood. It has a lot of blood in some scenes. But I did it bother you, Walker, the vampire scenes, or
Not like Evil Dead. This, because of the humor, I think. I could live without it, but it didn't kill me.
there's a group of werewolves that they have a problem with, vampires and werewolves, and so they have a friend, Nick, and Nick gets bitten by a werewolf, and it's kind of like, the ending of the story is kind of accepting, werewolves and vampires. But what was cool is at the end of the movie, Deacon shows up and he attempts to hypnotize the audience to forget, what they saw in the film. So it's kind of like a little Marvel, wait till after the credits scene.
I don't know if I made it that far. I think once the credits came out, I was like, good.
So
It was
what
it was
do you
kind
think
of a
the film, Bob?
hard, it was a hard watch for me. There was some interesting parts. I liked Peter. Of course, he got killed off.
He did.
But yeah, I was just, I don't know. Maybe I'm jaded against Taika Waititi and his other films I've seen, which, we've talked about some of them before. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping if we ever get into the TV series that it's a lot better than the movie. But it was rather a hard slag.
I think the TV show is similar yet better
Yeah.
than the movie.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I was
And-
going
and
to say I liked the movie, but I really, really loved the TV show.
I enjoy the movie. I think it's different. I think it is a basis and a foundation for what they do in the TV show, which is so good. But we're not doing TV, we're doing movies. So I went with this. So you've seen this movie before, right, Karen?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun. It's interesting. A little different. And if you guys haven't seen it, Bob won't recommend you do, but I will. I was joking around earlier. One of my picks was going to be Ganja and Hess, but we've already covered that film. So
yeah, there's no chance I'll watch that.
Not even for the podcast. We'll watch it again.
Well, let's go ahead and kick it back up to the satellite. Walkie, what do you got for us?
Okay. So my second and final pick for the evening is a 1983 film called The Hunger, directed by Tony Scott, little brother of Ridley Scott.
Ooh.
So this film is highly stylized. Basically, I might say it's style over substance. but I think there's a lot here to like. I would not say it's a perfect film by any means, but I think it's a very interesting film. Tony Scott, this was his first motion picture. He had worked in commercials and videos before this, and you can kind of tell, there is a certain video sensibility to it if you really watch the cuts and the framing. And this guy is really concerned about the lighting and the angles, and every scene is set up a certain way, and the production design is very specific. And so it is maybe more about how things look than about the narrative. It's most of the time I'm going to be more focused on the story, but knowing what I'm getting in this, it's okay to me that maybe it's a little bit more about the visuals. He went on to make Top Gun and Days of Thunder, Man on Fire, and Crimson Tide. So he went on to make a lot of other really great movies. I think part of the issues with this is they compromised on the ending. So I'm not going to go through every detail of the story, but for those who haven't seen it, it features Catherine Deneuve as this basically ancient vampire. And she has she has a companion who initially is David Bowie, who is a couple hundred years old. As vampires, they're not like a typical vampire. They don't have fangs, and they can go out in daylight and everything, but they do drink blood. And they have these little ankh necklaces that have a knife inside, and they lure their victims, and then they cut their throats and drink their blood that way. But apparently Miriam's partners get eternal life, but they don't get eternal youth. And at some point during this time, as they're living with her, they start to age rapidly, but they don't die. They just stay as like withering husks. And she has a whole attic full of her past lovers that are just laying inside caskets decaying, which is pretty gruesome. So another major player in the film is Susan Sarandon. She's a doctor who's investigating aging, ways to control or stop aging. And so they just happen to be in the same city. And then Miriam takes an interest in her, but initially David Bowie's character goes to her to see if she can help with his aging, and that doesn't happen. He winds up becoming decrepit. Miriam puts him in a box in the attic. And then Miriam begins to pursue Susan Sarandon's character as a potential next partner. So I think one of the problems with the film is I guess they wanted it to be sort of this metaphor about addiction and how destructive addiction could be. But the ending, they tacked on this ending where Susan Sarandon survives.
Yeah.
Where she was supposed to have taken her own life, but then she winds up showing up later. So it kind of negates that whole thing about I don't want to be an addict and live forever. So
and instead of becoming a husk, she's now a vampire, so she doesn't have to worry about becoming a husk. Again, this is that rule thing, but
right, the rules are a little wonky because it's okay, so she kind of offed herself, but then she didn't die, but then Miriam died. Anyway, I would say probably best not to worry about the rules in this one. Just watch it for the visuals. I know Larry's going to bring up the doves, but it's an interesting film. That the opening is really cool because they're in a nightclub and the band Bauhaus is playing, and they're playing Bela Lugosi's Dead. So you have to see it just for the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it has a lot of interesting visuals. It's maybe a slog for some, but the first 5 minutes are definitely worth it. And a different type of vampire story, definitely an 80s film. So if you like the 80s, you might like it. But yeah, and just a warning, You may not want to watch it with your mom or your kids or whatever. There's a lot of sex in it. There is also lesbian sex in it. So if that's an issue for people, just be warned. So there's my second pick.
Yeah, this is actually the first time I've seen the film.
Hmm.
I hadn't seen it before. And no, I thought it was definitely interesting. I was kind of looking forward to see David Bowie, but he didn't last too long in the film. In fact, after that first scene, Debbie was walking through the room. I want to say, "Hey, you recognize the actor playing?" And then it's like, "Well, do you recognize the actor that's under all this tons of makeup?" He was like unrecognizable by that point.
Yeah.
But no, I think it was pretty interesting how I think they spent the longest time on him as far as her companions. Um, and at first I was kind of like, okay, so why is he aging? Is he not feeding, or is there something else going on? Because they don't really explain it other than, yeah, he's aging, and then he aged out. But I don't know if there was a background story or a novel or something where they told why she doesn't age and all her companions do. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember. So it's based on a novel by Whitley Strieber, who is probably better known to people for writing the Communion books about his experiences with space aliens. But
one of my favorites.
And I did read it many, many years ago, and I can't remember if there's anything in the novel that he does get into her history more in the novel, but I don't know if he explained the whole process in the novel or if it was left, more mysterious. I just know from kind of watching it a few times, and I did listen to the commentary this last time, Tony Scott was a little more interesting than Toby Hooper, not a lot more, but a little more. They had Tony Scott and they had Susan Sarandon on the commentary. And I think they do explain that all of her partners eventually begin aging. And when they do, it like catches up to them very quickly. But they won't die. They'll just always remain like these decaying husks. So it's a pretty terrible.
So here's the question for you guys. If you could become a vampire and you have eternal life, but is it worth it if most of your eternal life is in a husk? I mean, maybe you could probably get more youthful years out of it, but then if you're going to wind up like that and locked in a coffin in a attic somewhere, is it worth it?
Plus, you gotta cut all the bodies up and put them in garbage bags and throw them, and you gotta have a big fire somewhere. It's too much work.
It's just too much.
It's too much. It's too much work. What do you think, Larry?
Husk. There's David Bowie. All those guys were living a miserable life. So no, I'm more of like a vampire Lestat where, you just kind of go to sleep for a while, wake up in a century and just kind of acclimate to, Blu-rays instead of VHS, or, whatever the modern, parts of living are.
I want to be like Lon Chaney Jr. in Son of Dracula and be able to coffin surf down the swamp. That's out in a coffin, and he's just like going down.
I did think it was interesting when Bowie and Deneuve were talking, when he's still youthful. And the whole thing is, I'll love you forever and ever. And then it gets to the point where he's pretty old. And he asked her, will you love me forever and ever? And she can't answer. And then he says, kiss me.
Oh.
And she tries, but then she's like, I can't do it. And then I think at that point he realizes that forever is not a long time, and forever is over right now.
Yeah, her forever and his forever, or the other
false promises. So.
Right.
Right.
She knew what would happen eventually, but she wants companionship, so she lies to them.
Well, and he asks, kill me. And I think there's a part of her that does love him. And that's why she hasn't killed any of them, unless she's kind of like living off of what's left of their essence as well as the blood. I don't know. I'm just,
Well, she has her companions, but then there's also her victims.
Mm-hmm.
Two totally different things. So, yeah, the victims can be bagged up, chopped up, and thrown in a fire, but the companions she keeps around.
Right. And once they become husks, they could be thrown in the fire too. But she doesn't. So, and
Well, because they're companions, there's that relationship. The others are just arbitrary victims that are disposable.
They're just
we'll go
meals.
with that.
They're happy meals.
One of the things that caught, we're talking about the style, this kind of reminded me of Blade Runner in some of the scenes, the way that it was just kind of altruistic and kind of it could be any time. It's not like the Goonies where you're like, oh, this is an 80s movie, which was kind of cool. But damn, there were a lot of doves in that film.
Yeah, there are a lot of doves.
What was Prince filming on the next set, and they just
Well, here's my last question on this film.
Yes, sir.
David Bowie was definitely the slim white Duke in this thing. So was he that way because that was his style at the time, or did the movie influence his style at the time?
I think he started that prior to this film.
Because it was like what, China Girl and Modern Love. And...
That was after this film.
Yeah, I think that his Thin White Duke stuff started when he went to Berlin, and I want to say that was late 70s, early 80s. So I think it was concurrent. I think he'd already started that stuff.
I will say, of all the actors, I loved his portrayal. I'm not a big, I'm a Bowie fan of his music, but his acting is, but he just really nailed it. And how he knew that he had hours left and was telling Susan Sarandon 20 minutes. I'll wait 20 minutes. And in a period of 2 hours, he aged like 50 years.
Yeah, you really felt the sense of tragedy with what was going on. And then it was weird though, because it's like he's still this hunter, this like when he's in the washroom with that guy and he's thinking about trying to kill him, but he doesn't know if he has the strength to do it still. And he's like eyeing that guy, and the guy is probably thinking like, what is this pervy old man doing? Right. Not realizing this guy might kill him, he's just thinking he's like a weirdo or something. And so on one hand, it's like you feel bad for him, and yet it's like, oh, he's a murderer, It's an interesting balance that Bowie was able to make you feel sympathy for him, even though he's a killer. And just like when he takes that girl, Alice,
the violin player, yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible, but he's just also very pathetic too.
He's desperate.
Right.
And the ending was brilliant. All the husks coming out and just kind of.
If they had just left it that way, right, with them all attacking her and then her going, I think that would have been a perfect ending.
Yeah. But the way they ended it,
yeah, kind of mixed message. I don't know. Not a great ending, but otherwise, I think it's an interesting film.
Definitely. Well, we're gonna go from artsy fartsy to one of Keikos's picks.
What?
From the artsy fartsy film, vampire film, to my not so artsy fartsy. Actually, this is kind of artsy for me. Let the Right One In. This is the original from back in 2008, and it's a Swedish romantic horror film. again, pardon my pronunciation, by Thomas Alfvedson, and it's based on the 2004 novel of the same name by John Ajvide Lindquist, who also wrote the screenplay for the film. And the film tells the story of a bullied 12-year-old boy named Oscar, who develops a friendship with a strange child in a suburb of Stockholm. And, Oscar is bullied. And he when you see him, he looks like he gets bullied. He just has that look, the poor kid. And the film opens with him like with a little pocket knife stabbing a tree, saying, squeal, piggy, squeal, or something like that. And there's this what appears to be a little girl on the monkey bars. And this is like winter, so there's snow, and he's bundled up, and she's just there and like dressed in a sweater. And they have this brief conversation like, what are you doing? None of your business. Well, I don't want to be your friend. Well, I don't want a friend. They're 12-year-old kids, and so they're having that kind of banter. And so he goes to school. He lives with his mom, and I guess they had separated. And his father lives out on a farm, and Ellie is the girl's name, who happens to be a vampire. And they don't really get into her history in the film. I want to get the book. But she's like a 200 or 400-year-old vampire, and she was made into a vampire when 12 years old. And she has an older person who she moves into the apartment, and I think it's pronounced Haken. And he's probably in his 50s, and he goes out killing for her, and he pours the blood into some kind of a container, and then she's able to drink the blood. And at some point he messes up very badly, and the police come in, and he had, I don't know why he had acid, but he pours acid all over his head and is admitted into the hospital. And she goes to him, and she's, he's screwed up a couple of times, but this was a big screw up. And he basically sacrifices himself at that point, gives her and then he leaps to his death. So this is a very graphic, no comedy really whatsoever.
Right, there's nothing humorous. I was thinking about that.
No, not at all. This is kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, almost like Psycho. Psycho is a very uncomfortable movie to watch, and you have to give the actors credit, especially these kids. I don't know if they were 12 when they filmed this, but anyway, I think they do a great job. So at that point, Ellie no longer has a caretaker, and she tells Oscar, look, when these kids bully you, you hit them back, and you hit hard, and they will leave you alone. So she's trying to figure out what to do as far as food goes. She tries attacking adults to various degrees of success, but then the police again get involved. And whereas Oscar, this kid's bugging him out on the frozen lake and the field trip with the school, and he takes this stick and he knocks the kid in the head, cracks his ear. The kid's like, "Wah!" And Oscar's like, this is great. He's not going to bother me anymore. And at some point, Ellie comes to his house. His mom's working at nights, and says, can I come in? Vampire rules. And he's like, yeah, come in. And she crawls into his bed with him. It's like 2 a.m. And he's like, you're cold. She's like, yeah. And whatever that conversation is. And Ellie says, I'm not a girl. Does that bother you? And Oscar's like, no, I'm fine with it. Anyway, excuse me, sorry. They wind up falling in love, and it turns out that Ellie is a eunuch. Was castrated fully as a youth when whoever the vampire was that made her into a vampire. And what was kind of an interesting scene to me is Oscar, she tells him, look, I'm a vampire, and then blah blah. And he says, she's like, I can't come in unless you invite me. And he's like, oh, well, I guess you. So he convinces her to walk in without being invited. And she starts hemorrhaging from her ears and her eyes. And
That
then
was
he's like,
really
okay,
interesting.
come in. What's that?
That was really interesting scene.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like that before.
As far as the vampire lore goes, but to me, the love story really spoke to me in this. Doesn't matter, if you're a boy or a girl. Doesn't matter if you're the undead. Doesn't
A
matter.
young serial killer in the making.
A young serial killer in the making to feast. I mean, she does take their money too, but anyway. And she cares for him and he cares for her. But she says, look, I have to go. I can't stay here anymore because of what I've done. And what happens is that bully that he hit real hard has an older brother. And the older brother's from the wrong side of town. And he gets his little hoodlums together and says, okay, here's a knife. You tell me where he is. And Oscar is, trying to better himself. And so he's lifting weights, talking to the teacher. He's taking an aquatic aerobics class because that's what they do in Switzerland. It's indoors. It's away from the snow. And the best scene, and this is a big spoiler alert. So if you haven't watched the movie, pause YouTube or the podcast, go watch the movie and come back, because he's swimming and the guy's telling him, the bad bully, get out now. No. Hold your breath for 3 minutes. And he's like, I can't hold my breath for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. He says, if you don't, I'm going to cut off your ear or something like that.
Your eye.
I'm going to stick in your. And so he's like, I'm going to die. He closes his eyes. Ellie's left. She had, the cops are after her. Closes his eyes, goes underwater, and you watch him, and it's like he's going to die. Is the expectation until you see one of those bad boys fall into the pool and go like Jaws. And those of you watching on YouTube just saw my finger go left and right and back and forth. And it was the freakiest thing to me. And then, the older brother, who's wrong side of town, is holding Oscar's head, and his hand just drops in the water with blood around it. And, cut to the finale. Oh, I forgot. There was another tidbit. They learn Morse code, so they can tap on the wall and communicate. So Oscar decides, I'm going to go with Ellie and take care of her. And they're in a train, and she's knocking on the box that she's hiding in, and he's knocking back at her, and off they go into the sunset. Walker, what did you think of the film?
I did not see it in the theater, but I did see it not long after it first came out.
I, with you, did not see it in the theater.
Yeah, I think I
But
saw
I
it
know
on
someone who might have.
yeah, could
No,
be.
this is actually the first time I've seen it.
Oh,
I'd
wow.
never seen it before.
And then I got the book and read it afterwards.
Oh, cheers to you.
I was interested in it. Yeah, this is a really interesting movie. Like I had said in our chat, not something I would just watch for shit and giggles, but
Not a feel-good film.
yeah, it's it has some disturbing stuff in it. I mean, very understated, because Ellie's guardian, Hakan or whatever his name is,
No.
It's questionable, why is he with her? You could say that perhaps he is an unsavory gentleman who has an interest in her that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a little disturbing. And of course, he's a murderer. And then she latches on to Oscar, and Oscar has his little notebook with all the murders and things that have happened around. So he has a rather unsavory interest in murder and death and things like that, which implies to me that, he may be just a serial killer
In the
waiting
making.
to sprout. But on the other hand, they make you feel very sympathetic towards both Oscar and Ellie. So it I don't know, it messes with you a little bit about where your sympathies should lie, because
Right.
the kids that bully him are such awful people too, right? There's
Yeah.
not a lot of people here to feel really sympathetic towards. His parents are, neither of them seem, well, his dad seems to have some interest in him. His mom, I don't know, she just seems really busy and focused elsewhere. There's not a lot of affection for him. Yeah, but it's a shocker of a movie to sit through.
Definitely.
And the snot.
And
Oscar's snot, as I brought up in our chat. That's another thing that's probably the thing that disturbed me the most in this movie. That kid perpetually having this glaze of snot on his upper lip. It's
now,
like,
in
dude,
the book, did it say Oscar had snot? It was, his thing.
I've wiped the memory out, so I don't recall. Somebody else can tell us if they've read it recently. Put it on Twitter or Facebook or something.
There you go.
Well, that might have been just a little bit of inspirational acting by Oscar. Maybe he thought, my character really should have snot coming out of his nose.
Well, when I was little and we wanted to freak each other out, my grandmother had this big jar of Dep, the hair gel, and we'd grab some of it and put it under our lip and run out and go. "Ah." So maybe that's what they.
No, it was definitely an interesting film. It's like the kind of horror element was kind of few and far between.
Right.
So it was more like a youth romance with a twist. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that movie could have been made in this country.
Well,
Just because there's a lot of like taboo subjects, like the older guy living with her, and then the relationship between a couple 12-year-olds, and fact that she's living on her own for a while, and then there's two 12-year-olds on a train heading off to who knows where. But,
there is an American version of the film, and I saw it once, and I don't remember much about it.
Probably quite different.
I don't think it was all that different, really.
I don't think it was all that different. I think that and this might just be me, that the guy was actually a past 12-year-old friend, lover, whatever, and just grew old. But again, that might just be me kind of filling in the blanks. But otherwise, yeah, it's not that memorable. So
Well, I know I don't have, I think it's on Showtime. I think last year they tried to make a TV series of it.
I read about that, and did they?
They did, but I don't know if anybody watched it. I haven't. No, I just haven't heard much about it. I saw they were making it and it was on the air, but as far as like people, I haven't heard like people saying, "Oh, you got to watch this" or anything like that.
Well, and I know there's a Lestat series, and they actually got a
that.
second season out of it. I saw some of the first season. I'm a huge Vampire Lestat fan. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to check it out.
Well, that original film is really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. It's not something that you'd watch like every year. It's been a decade or so probably since I saw it. You watch it and you're like, okay, that was interesting. But again, I think the tragedy is a child becoming a vampire was part of the allure as well. Forever locked in that body, but having the knowledge and experience of several 100 years worth.
Yeah.
But anyway,
well, that's the whole thing too about when you're bit. However old you were when you got bit, that's how old you're going to be for
or
the rest of eternity until you get staked or whatever. But
Yeah, that
there
rule seems
actually
pretty consistent.
there actually is, and I can't remember the name of the film, so I probably shouldn't say anything, but you get bit and you get back to the age process reverses to your like prime age.
Hmm.
And I don't remember. I'm watching so much stuff right now for the podcast, and just because it's Halloween. And speaking of Halloween, before we get into our censor sweep, I think we wanted to do an honorable mention.
We have, well, Bob has one more
I still
movie.
have one movie.
Bob has one more movie. That's right. Sorry,
Right.
Bob. Take it away.
You skipped over me.
Just seeing if you were paying attention.
Oh man. Yeah, no, I chose a movie that I usually watch every year around Halloween. And it was from 1985. All I can say is welcome to Fright Night.
One of my favorite films ever, not just vampire.
Yes. So Fright Night was written and directed by Tom Holland, but not everyone's favorite web swinger.
Not that one.
It's actually Tom Holland, the older Tom Holland, who wrote and directed The Beast from Within, Psycho 2, Child's Play, etc. And he did this with basically only a seed of an idea of what if a horror movie fan figured out that his neighbor was a vampire. And he kind of like floated that around for a while. He didn't really know where to go with it until he met with the head of Columbia Pictures, and his name was John Byers. And he suggested, well, if you were a horror fan and your neighbor was a vampire, who would you go to? Well, you go to Vincent Price, right? So that was the idea. You know, you go find a horror movie actor. Obviously, Vincent Price was not available for this movie, so they got Roddy McDowall, who was excellent role.
Yeah.
And they named him Peter Vincent. Peter from Peter Cushing, Vincent from Vincent Price. So he's sort of a combination of Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And he's a washed up horror movie actor who played Van Helsing type characters in the films. And now he's a horror movie host. And of course, we're all just very well familiar with all these different horror movie hosts that are around. In fact, we've had a few on the show. So he goes to Peter Vincent to help him out. You got to help me out. My neighbor's a vampire. And of course, he doesn't believe it. So he calls up the neighbor, or actually, sorry, his two friends, it was Amy and Evil Ed. They go and convince Peter Vincent to help, mainly with a bribe from Amy. She had like a stock or bond or something. It was like $500, and she gave that to him to help out. So what he did was he called the vampire and said, look, I need to do this. I'm going to bring over, well, first he was going to bring over a cross, saying, all I need you to do is just grab the cross. Obviously, he can't do that. So he says, well, I'm very religious. I can't do that. That would be sacrilegious. So he says, well, what if I brought over a vial of holy water? And he's like, oh, I don't know. It's still, and he says, well, it won't be holy water. It's going to be regular water in a vial. Okay, I can do that. So he goes over there with Charlie, who's the horror movie, or the horror host, the horror fan, and his two friends, and they go up to the vampire. And of course, he drinks the holy water, nothing happens. So, of course, Charlie is still not convinced that he's not a vampire. But Peter Vincent tells him, you know, this is it. I have performed the test and he's not a vampire. So, as he's like going out of the house and the vampire's still talking to Charlie and his friends, he pulls out a mirror, a little fold out mirror, and he looks, and there's no reflection. So he really is a vampire. So of course Peter Vincent runs out of the house, gets in his car. I'm out of here. Off he goes. He's getting ready to pack up and leave. And in the meantime, the vampire kidnaps his girlfriend Amy and tells him, "You need to come to the house tomorrow at dawn, well, at sunset, with Peter Vincent if you want to see your girlfriend again." So he goes out, finds Peter Vincent. Peter Vincent wants nothing to do with it until he convinces him, "Hey, Amy's in trouble, blah, blah, blah." So they basically go and they team up and have to go after the vampire. But it's just a very fine line between seriousness and comedy. And Evil Ed is just, he ends up becoming a vampire, becoming one of his minion. And again, he's just hilarious, with the way he talks and the way he interacts. And then Amy is played by Amanda Bierce, very young Amanda Bierce, who would go on to play Marcy Darcy in Married with Children.
Yeah.
And I think William Ragsdale played Charlie Brewster, and I read, interestingly enough, that he also plays a priest in the recent film Renfield.
Yeah.
So he's
You're
brought
right.
into, what's that?
You were
Yes.
right.
Yep. So he's still in the horror genre.
The
to
guy
speak.
that played Dandridge, the vampire.
Sarandon.
He did the
Yes.
voice. He did the voice of Jack Skellington in Nightmare Before Christmas.
I thought, well, anyway,
Yeah,
he was
Chris
in the
Sarandon
Sentinel.
plays the vampire.
Yeah, he was in the Sentinel. We watched that the other night, and I was like, "Hey, that's Dandridge."
And he's Susan Sarandon's brother. It's all
There you
connected.
go.
Hey,
It's all connected.
we've come full circle.
Mhm. There's no doves in Fright Night, though.
No doves in Fright Night.
Zero
But I mean,
doves.
there are some great lines. Even the whole thing where Peter Vincent comes up with a cross and holds it back, spawn of evil. Like getting into his character, and Dandridge just laughs and says, "You have to have faith for that to work, Mr. Vincent," and just like grabs it and crushes it. But then Charlie jumps up with one, and it affects him because I guess he believed, he had the faith. But it was
Great movie.
very, very funny film.
Still holds up today.
Yep. So since I did watch it for this, I don't have to watch it again for Halloween, but I can move on to some other Halloween
I've
movies.
been looking for Fright Night Part 2, and I've had
And there was also a remake in like 2011, but
boo.
I hadn't bothered with either one. So
Yeah, it's yeah.
This was one of those movies that eluded me when it first came out. And I don't think I saw it until maybe, 10 years ago or so. Was like the first time I saw it. And I was really surprised because it was like, oh, it's got Roddy McDowall, who, being a big Apes fan, I like to see whatever he's in. So I was really surprised that somehow it just never got on my radar. And then I saw it and was like, oh, this is a pretty good movie. So I don't know how it is just never got to me until, recently.
yeah, I was reading some comments by Roddy McDowall, the fact that at first he didn't really want to do it, but then he thought, oh, I can put a certain slant on this. And he liked the idea of shooting the scenes from Peter Vincent's old films where he's in his 20s and staking vampires. And then it would go on to where he would be an old man with old man makeup in his retired years when he was washed up and hosting Fright Night on TV. So I definitely got in and started watching it.
Very cool.
And supposedly at one point, Roddy McDowall invited Tom Holland over to his house to a party, and Vincent Price was there. And
Oh,
they told Vincent Price that the character Peter Vincent was based on him, and part of his name came from Vincent and Vincent Price. And he said he loved the movie and he loved what Roddy did in the film and all that. So definitely got his stamp of approval.
that's cool.
It is
Very
fun.
cool. Well, I apologize, Bob. I can't believe I forgot one of my favorite films of all time. Your second pick. It is that time, though. We will very briefly, maybe a minute each, share our honorary mention for vampire films. And again, this isn't necessarily our favorite vampire film, but we're picking films that we thought were different and or interesting. So let's kick it back up to the satellite. Karen, do you have a honorable mention that didn't make it into the...
I do. And as we talked about right before the show, I don't know why, but for some reason I mentally excluded all Hammer and Universal films when we were doing this. I think because we've done multiple separate episodes on those topics, and we just did Christopher Lee a few months ago. So I kind of put those to the side. But I love all of those great Hammer films. And of course, Universal, mainly it's Dracula. But anyway, my honorable mention is from 1970, and it's a film called Count Yorga. And Count Yorga has a long history I won't go into here, but basically started out as a soft porn film and then turned into a horror film. And I think an effective one. It was one of those films that I remember as a kid watching on a late night movie and doing one of those constant turnarounds and really creeped out. So I will definitely recommend it as sort of a very low budget, creepy vampire movie.
Awesome. My honorary mention, in thinking of our friend Will the Thrill Vajaro,
Oh God.
Santo versus Las Mujeres Vampiro. And Santo is a world famous luchador. The movie was from 50s, and just has our favorite luchador battling female vampires. So if you get a chance, check it out.
Don't get much better than that.
That's right. Bob, what are you going to regale us with for your honorable mention?
There were 2 or 3 films I could have mentioned, but one I thought that was pretty good and quite interesting was 30 Days of Night. And that one is the whole concept is that, when you get closer to the North Pole and you're not at the equator, and basically you get these nights that last for 30 days. And so the idea is that there's a whole colony of vampires up there because, hey, we don't have to come out for 8 to 12 hours, go back in. We got free reign for 30 days. And the people of the city or the town have to survive for those 30 days. And it's easy, and it's one thing to be able to survive a night, and then they're all in their coffins and you can plot your vengeance or whatever, but stake them out.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's 30 days straight, that's it. There's no rest.
Watch out.
But it was that, and I was also talking just before the podcast about a Hammer film called Lust for a Vampire. And that was it was showing on Channel 44 here as I was growing up under the title To Love a Vampire. And it was, kind of a sexy type vampire film. Ute Stensgaard, who was like a Swedish model. She was a star. And Anthony Bates was also in there, another Hammer actor. And it's like, okay, I remember that. I kind of enjoyed it. So I bought the DVD later on, which was under the original title Lust for a Vampire, and it was quite a different movie. Skinny dipping and lesbian sex and nudity and
Oh
it's like
my.
this was not the movie I remember on Channel 44 growing up. But yeah,
Wow.
still a good movie. But it was like the sequel to The Vampire Lovers, I think, with Ingrid Pitt.
Interesting. All right. Well, my friends, share with us some of your favorite vampire films. Maybe not favorite, but what you think are interesting and or different. Our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, a comment on YouTube. We're going to jump into our censor sweep. Bob, why don't you start us off? What do you got to share with us this week?
Well, I think we're running into a very long episode again, so keep it quick, short. Being the Halloween season, and I usually watch a bunch of movies, leading up to Halloween or Halloween episodes of TV shows, and you can check both those episodes of Planet 8 out, where we talk about all that. This year, I'm reading a book, reading a Lumen book, and it's a gothic fantasy series of books, and this one is all on Asian ghost short stories, and nice thick hardcover, and it basically has short stories from Japan, China, Korea, and throughout Asia. And I've read the first few, and they're actually very good. It's a very different dynamic compared to ghost stories you'd have here in the U.S. So very interesting, and I'll be reading that leading up to our favorite holiday, Halloween.
Yes, indeed. Let's kick it up to the satellite. Walker, what do you got for us?
Well,
You have a book as well?
book.
Another blooming book.
Kit Kat.
Candy. Don't forget your candy this year, kids. It's important to keep traditions alive.
I agree.
No crayons or other crap. Give out candy. I have a book. I was inspired by our good friend Bill, also known as Spy Vinyl on Twitter.
Wonderful person.
He's a great guy. And he just got a copy of this book. And I was like, oh gosh, I have that book. And I pulled it out and started looking at it. Now, you may not be able to see it too well on the YouTubers because I have my virtual background on, but
it disappeared.
This is the Universal Studios Monsters, A Legacy of Horror by Michael Mallory. This came out a few years back, but it's still just a fantastic reference material, fun to just read. And it's got beautiful pictures from all the films in it, has a lot of backstory and descriptions of all the different films. And so if you're in that Universal Monsters mood, and who wouldn't be around Halloween, it's a great book. And a lot of times you can find it on like Amazon, but I've also noticed a lot of times in the bookstores, especially this time of year, they may have it even in like the half price bins. So just keep your eyes open.
I love that book.
It's a great book. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, half price books and even deepdiscount.com. A lot of times have really good
Excellent
prices.
resources.
Thrift books. Yeah, Thrift Books is another good one too.
Hey, and like you said, this is our favorite time of the year. This is the national holiday for Planet 8, Halloween. So, Walker pulled up some Kit Kat candy. Make sure you got your trick-or-treaters. We would love for you to share some pictures of your decorations, the trick-or-treaters coming by, some of the cool costumes. You can comment on our Facebook, on our Twitter, share those photos with us. Come our November 8th episode, we're going to show some video and some pictures of our setups for Halloween. It's going to be difficult for Karen up in the satellite to do too much.
I was going to say,
she's got one of those like 12-foot Home Depot skeletons, just kind of like on a tether, floating outside the
Floating
space station.
in zero
Well,
G.
let me say, one of the most impressive yards decorated when you had that UFO crash when you lived
Crashed
out in
UFO.
Alameda.
Yeah, that
was
was
impressive.
nice. That was really cool. We had that crashed UFO in the yard, and people really
And you
liked
couldn't
that.
buy it. I mean, Walker just made it. So
That was a whole lot of little scraps of wood and foil and prayers. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
So
my daughter and
anyway.
I did a UFO thing too. In fact, I don't know if you can see it. I got my UFO hanging up in the rafters here. There it is. You can kind of see it with the lights going around it.
Oh, nice.
I can't get this camera up high enough to get a full view, but that was made with like 2 snow discs put together with a hamster ball cut in half, top and bottom, strobe on one side, light on the other, and then a rope light around the perimeter that just makes that chasing thing. And put it on a big black stick and put it up on my roof. So it looked like I was hovering above the house.
That's cool.
So
Awesome. So yeah, come November 8th, we'll have our regular podcast. Stay tuned for what that's going to be. And then we'll have some cool shots of decorations and trick-or-treaters and all that.
you know what we could do? If people put their Halloween displays on our social media, and there's some that are pretty impressive, maybe we can show theirs too on that episode.
Put it out there, kids.
So submit your videos and your
November
pictures.
8th.
And we'll throw a little something together, a little something.
Indeed. Your mission commander was very fortunate to be invited to go and see Sir Patrick Stewart in San Francisco. Thank you very much to Jeff Winkle and Lauren, who alerted me to his visit. Not only were they able to score awesome ticket for me, like right, literally center row. For those of you on YouTube, they gave out a copy of his autobiography. And he spoke for about an hour and a half. He came from humble beginnings. His family was very poor. His father fought in World War II. Matter of fact, he was one of the soldiers that kind of helped get the British version of paratroopers together. And he regaled us with stories of his friend Ian McKellen, you know, the cast of The Next Generation. He also talked about Ringo and you know, what's so funny is he forgot Ringo's name when he was talking to us, and I forgot Paul's name as I'm talking to you guys, so I'm in good company. But they're knighted as well, and he was saying, you know, he doesn't want to be a prude, but Sir Patrick means something to him because he was a poor little boy that lived in a one up, one down little flat in, you know, the northern part of England, and you know, now here he is, a knight of the realm. Anyway, thank you again, Jeff and Lauren. Not only did everybody got a book who purchased those tickets in the bottom level, there was a balcony level, no books. They got him to personalize, not just sign, but personalize, and I have that up to the camera for those of you that need to jump over to YouTube.
Very nice.
You know, I saw Anthony Daniels a couple years ago, and it was a small bookstore in San Francisco, and he signed books, but he wouldn't personalize because it would take too long. This is a treasure. Eventually, we've talked about this for months, if not a year or two, to have Jeff on the show. We will have him on, and he can regale you with all the stories of mask making and model building. My wife is a craft person, and we went to visit Jeff's garage, and he had 3 3D makers, and she was like, "Oh my God, that's the whatever 3000," and she knew all that stuff. So anyway, that was your mission commander's adventure out in San Francisco on a Sunday night, walking through parts of San Francisco you don't want to walk through at 10 o'clock at night. But
Most of school night.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Anyway, my friends, it is always a pleasure for you to invite us into your speakers, your computers, your video monitors, however you experience Planet 8 podcast. Happy Halloween. I hope you have a plethora of trick-or-treaters. If you yourself are a trick-or-treater, I hope you get a lot of good candies and surprises. You know, we decorated last year for the first time in a long time, and my mother was so excited she ordered Yoo-hoo for the kids. So we were handing out Yoo-hoos. And you know, we'll talk about it next episode when we show our decorations and stuff. But you guys stay safe, take care of yourselves, be good to each other. Until we meet again, Planet 8 signing off. And
Trick or treat.
And trick or treat.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.